call the roll.
Commissioner Cardoza,
Here.
Commissioner Donaldson,
Here.
Commissioner Jeffrey,
Here.
Commissioner Martin has an excused absence this evening, Commissioner Sherman,
Here.
Vice Chair Flores,
Here.
Chair Hoff.
Here.
6 commissioners are present.
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
This is the time for public comment. If anybody has a comment that they would like to make before the Planning Commission of an item that's not on the agenda, please come forward at this time. Limit your comments to 3 minutes. Seeing no one interested, we'll move on. Action recap, please.
I move to approve.
If there's
Oh,
one,
I'm sorry, I can't. I have to abstain. I wasn't at the last meeting.
Nice try.
Almost me.
I move.
I have one change. On the last page, second paragraph, Commissioner Cardoza said he disagreed with Commissioner Hoff and said he would personally escort people around the city if necessary. That was me. I know that Buzz is out there on his bike a lot, but I'm not sure that he wants to be that escort, so that should be Commissioner Sherman. And with that change, I move approval.
Second.
Oh, okay, so
Sherman moved and Donaldson second,
Addie and I are both recused from that.
without exception.
Okay.
Oh, and 2 recused.
Or abstention.
Abstention.
And Chair Hoff, it's just been pointed out to me that due to a typographical error, the director's report is not listed on the agenda.
I'm
but
sorry, what?
The director's report is not listed on the agenda, but I'd be happy to give you one if you would like.
Who pointed that out to you? I didn't.
No, the TV guy pointed it out.
Please give us your
Brandon.
I'd be very pleased to have the director's report.
Okay, thank you. Well, first with regard to the city council, since there was no planning commission meeting in March, the council has met 4 times since your last meeting, so there's several items to go over here. On March 2nd, the council approved a noise waiver for Starbucks over here at the East Bay Bridge Shopping Center to do some remodeling on a 24-hour basis for about 5 days, which is now complete. And I heard no complaints, so apparently it wasn't an issue. Concerning the firearms and ammunition issue, the council approved an urgency interim ordinance establishing a temporary moratorium on firearms and ammunition retailers at their March 2nd meeting, and they also introduced an ordinance stipulating licensing requirements. There is a companion zoning ordinance amendment which you will be considering later this evening that will be going to the City Council in May. The moratorium was subsequently extended at their April 6th meeting to a total of 1 year. The council on March 16th considered the second reading of that ordinance for licensing of firearms and ammunitions, and there were almost 50 speakers at that hearing, both for and against, slightly more in favor than opposed. The council decided to modify the ordinance slightly, which required a new first reading. So the final passage of that ordinance, which is the one that's licensing of firearm dealers, was passed on April 6th. Also on March 16th, the council approved the annual progress report on the housing element, which you previously saw, and approved forwarding that to the State Department of Housing and Community Development. On March 16th, the council introduced an amendment to the urban forestry ordinance that, among other things, will now require planning commission approval of all tree removal permits, even those that are not related to development projects. And it also sets forth submittal requirements for planning permits regarding tree information that must be provided on a planning application. That ordinance was passed on April 6th. The council introduced the interim ordinance that you previously recommended, extending allowing planning permits to be extended on a case-by-case basis for an additional 2 years to a total of 5 years, and that interim ordinance passed on April 6th. The council heard a status report on the noise waiver that they had previously granted for Pixar at their March 16th meeting. That was in response to complaints on 2 separate Saturdays from both from the same individual. After reviewing the information, the council unanimously directed staff not to prepare a resolution revoking the noise waiver. And finally, on March 16th, the council approved the RFP for the pedestrian and bicycle plan that you had previously seen, and that is now moving forward. On April 6th, the redevelopment agency considered the I-80 pedestrian and bicycle bridge. As you know, there was a community meeting on that on February 24th, and that was followed by a unanimous recommendation from the Bridge Committee at their March 8th meeting to focus on alignment number 3 and to eliminate the other 2 alignments. As you may recall, alignment 3 is the more northerly alignment that allows for a variety of different bridge designs and also includes a viewing platform on the west side overlooking the bay. And at the April 20th meeting, just a day before yesterday, the council considered an extension of the planning permits for the Ocean Lofts project. That's the 2-unit project that's on the north side of Ocean Avenue, just west of Vallejo Street. They considered an extension of those planning permits until next April of 2011. That extension actually is enabled by the interim ordinance on planning permit extensions since the project was originally approved 3 years ago. And without that interim ordinance, there would not be a possibility of any further extensions. However, the council indicated they would like to see the existing blighted house on the site demolished, but staff pointed out that the municipal code doesn't allow that because it says that the building permit for the replacement structure must be ready to issue before the demolition permit for the existing house can be issued. And the idea there is to protect existing housing stock. So the council continued the item and directed staff to develop a code amendment that would allow for demolition if the council so directs, as they wish to do in this case. So that's it for the City Council. The Zoning Update Steering Committee is continuing to work on the new zoning ordinance. Their last meeting was March 29th, at which they reviewed the sign regulations and the bonus point system. There's no meeting in April. The next meeting will be May 25th, at which the parking and design guidelines will be reviewed. And in other news, as you probably know, the city's operating budget for the next 2 fiscal years is currently being developed. All departments have been directed to reduce their spending because of the gap between revenues and expenditures. In the Planning and Building Department, we're proposing eliminating 1 intern position and charging more of our staff time to the general plan maintenance fee. As of now, the Planning Commission compensation of $100 per month for those of you who choose to receive it is still intact. The City Council is scheduled to adopt the budget on June 1st. And finally, I recently attended the American Planning Association's National Conference in New Orleans. The keynote speakers included Senator Mary Landrieu of Louisiana and HUD Secretary Sean Donovan. There were a lot of interesting sessions and mobile workshops, especially focusing on post-Katrina recovery. There will be a more detailed discussion of this in our April progress report, and I'd be happy to discuss it further with any of you who are interested. And that concludes my report. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Do you have a question?
I just have one on the tree ordinance, Charlie. What is the size of trees that are included in this review process?
All trees.
There's no caliper or no height or no
Well,
definition
it's
of
street trees,
Oh,
and a
okay.
street tree is defined as any tree on city property. So technically, the trees behind City Hall are street trees because they're on city property. So it's really city trees, but there's no minimum size.
On the, is that the ending?
That was-
And the Ocean Avenue project, I didn't understand, why wouldn't the owner be able to apply for a demolition permit and do that in lieu of getting a building permit?
Under the provisions of the zoning ordinance concerning demolition of residential structures, it says that any project that involves the demolition of a residential structure must be approved by the City Council, and the Planning Commission has to make a recommendation. But another provision of that ordinance is that the demolition permit for the existing structure cannot be issued until the building permit for the replacement structure is ready to issue. That's in the code. And the intent of that is to preserve existing housing stock so that they can't demolish the house and then later decide they're not going to build a new
I see.
building.
So even though the entitlement is
But you could
a
do
new
that
construction.
for a commercial building?
Yes, unless it's a significant building or a tier 1 or tier 2 building in the Park Avenue district. Right. So the council, in this case, the council wanted the house demolished, and their code that they adopted says that we can't do that.
I see.
So we have to figure out a way
Unless you get a building
around
permit
that.
first.
I see.
Even if
Okay.
the house is uninhabitable?
Well, there is a provision that says if the fire marshal or the building official declares the building to be, an imminent hazard, then it can be demolished. But the house is really, it's not a hazard, it's just a blight.
What would only be a hazard to other houses in the neighborhood?
I'm not sure what the definition is, but I think it's a higher bar than this.
Thank you very much. With regard to the agenda for people, citizens in the audience, item A, the 5A, the fire station, will not be discussed this evening due to an imperfection in the ordinance or whatever. It has to be postponed.
In the
Could you explain
noticing.
that? Pardon?
In the noticing.
The noticing was improper.
Right, there are 2 street trees that are being removed, which we didn't realize until after the notice already went out.
So if you're here for that item, it will not be discussed tonight. The other thing I'd like to know is, I think the Parks and Recreation may take a little while. How many of you are here specifically to discuss the firearms and ammunition ordinance? Anybody? Well, fine, then we don't. I thought I'd get it out of the way, but nobody's interested. So we'll stick to the agenda as written.
Okay.
So the first item on the agenda is a study session, which is a presentation of the Parks Recreation Strategic Plan. Diane?
Well, as directed by the Planning Commission and the City Council, an ad hoc committee and staff and MIG consultants are conducting a Parks and Recreation Strategic Plan process to decide how to implement.
Could you speak up a little?
Okay, it's on, right?
Maybe you need this one.
Is there a difference?
Yes, there is.
Oh, dear. Director gets a good mic. Okay. So we're conducting a Parks and Recreation Strategic Plan process to decide how to implement parks policies in the general plan. We've held some stakeholder interviews and a community workshop and had a questionnaire and some other things and notified interested people about the study session, so some of the people might want to speak after the presentation. Based on public input, MIG has prepared a needs assessment and site programming matrix about what recreational activities should be accommodated in what existing and future parks. MIG's Ryan Matau is here to outline the planning process, introduce the activities in the parks approach, and present the needs assessment and park activity matrix, walk through how activities would be accommodated in a few example parks, and ask the commissioners some questions to get your unique perspective. So here's Ryan.
Thank you.
I think I've got everything set up. Thank you very much for having me here, and glad to be moving this along another step. We feel it's a really important piece to bring all of the decision makers up to speed on where we're at in this process at this point. It's a pretty major milestone. You have some representation on the ad hoc committee that is guiding this process, and I think some of you have probably been following along outside of that as well. And so, but it's important for us to bring to you kind of the direction this plan is going so that we can make sure that we're not bringing you a final plan that, that doesn't align with the important work that you all have been doing. And so I want to just run through really quickly the process that we've been following. It's basically a 4-phase process that started last summer. And the first step is where we're at right now is really in the third phase, which will carry us through to a complete plan with then the adoption following this summer. With the goal, the stated goal of the ad hoc committee at this point is to make sure that this plan is adopted ahead of the start of the capital improvements planning process, which will start in September. And so the idea is to make sure that we move forward with this so that we're well lined up for the next round of capital funding. The basic four-stage process, I'm going backwards now. Okay, there we go. Basic four-stage process goes through where are we at now, and the bullet points on your presentation here are basically the tasks within that we've completed. Moving through to where do we want to be? This is the process that we're seeing the product of right now, which is the needs assessment and the preliminary park program. This included a lot of the public outreach. Diana hit on a number of the points. One of the images that you're seeing here is a product of another piece of the public involvement that was completed more recently. That was a workshop done with children from K through 6, I believe, or K through 8 in Emeryville's after-school programs. And we did a lot of a session with each of 3 different age groups, kind of working through aspects of the park system that they would like to see, designing their ideal park. And I just wanted to point that one out. But the next phase is really how do we get there? And that's the important part of this whole plan. And it's the key part of this being a strategic plan. And I'll talk a little bit at the end of this presentation about how the work that we're doing has built up to that point. I really want to emphasize that what we're doing here is building on the important work that you all have already done in establishing a vision and building the general plan that really has some very specific direction for Parks and Recreation. And on top of the wheres of how we should be distributing park land, one of the major issues that we started looking at was, well, what's going to be within these parks? The parks are not just about the land that they sit on top of, and trying the framework that you've set up of the major city parks and the other park opportunities, the greenways and green streets, gives us the front end work to really pay attention specifically to each of these existing and proposed sites. And we'll be talking a lot about major city parks and other park opportunities kind of in this presentation, because the big parks obviously have a lot of room for a lot of different things, and probably the biggest issue with those is not what are we going to put in them, but more what are we going to filter out? How are we going to decide what won't be a part of some of those bigger sites? And in doing this, we developed, along with the ad hoc committee, an approach to this that really is a different thing. And I wanted to highlight that it's very much focused on recreation activities and creating opportunities for those recreation activities. It seems to us that there's kind of 2 ways of looking at this. You can look at facilities, the playgrounds, the benches, the tables, the sports fields, all of the stuff that might go into a park system. Or you can look at the things you really want to encourage people to be doing, living active lifestyles, having all of these opportunities for great recreation. And what we came up with was a list of, it's a fairly long list, of 20 recreation activities that is drawn from the public input, from our observations of what already exists in your park system, and things that people have said that they would like to see, and elaborating on some of the kind of nuances of these. There's 4 of these activities that we clustered together as kind of the basic features. There was a pretty strong level of agreement coming out of the public, but also across the ad hoc committee, that these 4 activities, play for children, socializing, relaxing, picnicking and lunch, respite and solitude, really formed a basic level of service that should be present in pretty much every park in the system. Some of the other definitions, I'm not going to run through all of these, but some of the other definitions were really about some definitions that clarify what kind of facilities might fit with these activities. In sports, we're talking about high-speed competitive events, things that might have some safety requirements, field runouts and backstops and things like that. And games were more the casual activities, table, lawn, court games that maybe don't involve either impact or flying balls. And we wanted to be able to clarify what we were talking about between some of these points. Some of them were a matter of scale. Picnicking and lunch gathering even with a couple of coworkers to go out and take your lunch to the park is a different thing than organizing your family reunion at a park, and it requires a different set of facilities to support that. And some of them are about how actively programmed these things are. We made this distinction between programs and classes and education and learning, and the programs and classes really being the things that are advertised in your activity guide and happen on a schedule with an instructor, whereas education and learning, this is our definitions that I'm trying to explain. It's not that there's some freestanding definition of this floating out in the world, but for the purposes of this plan, education and learning was the kind of self-guided, the opportunities to learn about your environment by experiencing it or reading about it, interpretive signing as well as art in some cases. Coming back to art, there's the distinction here is between the activity of enjoying the art out in your city. This was a very important topic with your community, and then the other side of that coin being participating in those arts, creating arts, performing, and all of the artistic endeavors that people engage in. There's a number of other activities there, and if we talk about some that are unclear, feel free to jump in and say, well, I wanted to clarify some of the differences there, but I didn't want to take up the time to go through all 20. Where we started from in really looking at these needs, park by park, proposed site by proposed site, is we started with the concept that came out of the general plan. There are 3 major park sites, 2 of which are considered alternates, as you all know. I'm just clarifying for the audience. And there are then, I believe it was 12 other park opportunities that are lettered here, A through L. Am I doing that right? And then all of the existing parks as well. And we were able to go through site by site, activity by activity, and identify where there was potential for these activities throughout the park system in the current situation as well as other proposed sites. And we looked at things like, what are they close to? Are they close to other park sites? Are they close to residential uses primarily? Are they close to commercial centers in the city? What barriers are people crossing to get there? And really thought about, well, is there a basic level of kind of potential? Is there really no potential for that activity, or is there a lot of potential for that activity? And started filtering through all of these activities, all of these sites, and came to a point where through the filter of our professional judgment, the observations, and work with the committee, a preliminary site program. And now to explain this chart a little bit, basically what we were looking at is, at the end of the day, after we have looked at every park and every activity that we wanted to think about, which ones fit? How do we start putting this puzzle together? And within each of these activities, you can imagine there's kind of a range of facilities, and that dictates a lot about the size of what we're talking about. So Play for Children, for example. First thing that probably comes to mind for Play for Children is a playground, like the great new playground you have at Doyle Hollis Park. It's kind of the traditional form for just putting into a park to provide that play experience. However, I would argue that one of your best play experiences requires no facility at all, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit, but I think it's the beach at Point Emery. I mean, I think that's probably the best play feature you have in your entire city. But so each of these parks, as you'll see, the first 4 activities are present in nearly all of those parks, except where various site limitations kind of ruled them out. And then the other things are considered to be the add-ons, the kind of spice that adds the variety to the park system that your community wanted, and talks about them. In some cases, on this diagram, you're talking about existing parks. On this one, you're talking about proposed parks. I don't expect you all to be able to read this from the presentation, but I wanted to give a feel for it. This is just a way to organize this information. What I want to do next is run through a couple of these parks so that we can see what that means. What does this mesh of activities versus park sites come out to? Looking at that matrix, what we're trying to indicate is that for each indication on a line for that park, that you're going to have some level of support in the built environment. You're going to have some kind of either facility or thing that will help make it possible to engage in that activity. And some examples of that, the great example, Doyle Hollis Park. If you look at the matrix, almost every box is lit up because you have packed so much into this park. It's a great compact site that supports a huge range of potential activity. not all of those activities require anything different than a flat piece of grass. Some of them do require specific things like a basketball court, or the interactive water feature providing some play, the playground providing play, tables for those gatherings and things like that. But this whole list are all things that we feel are potentially supported by the existing condition of this park. Basically what we're saying is the program that we're proposing for this site is the same as the program that is there. You guys did a great job designing this park as a community. I think that there was a lot of work put into this. Just as a quick overview, I mean, all of those features are there, and it doesn't necessarily take a specific facility for each of these activities. Many types of spaces within a park can be used or support a lot of different activities. Point Emery is the other example, and it's almost a counterexample because Point Emery, instead of being a hugely designed, hugely invested in site, is almost a leftover. It's largely fill. It's, I don't think, ever been master planned. It has a parking lot, and that's about the extent of the development on that site. But it's still, through its just the nature of this site, literally, it supports a wide range of activities. And as I mentioned before, play for children is one of them. Relaxing out on that site may be one of the more kind of isolated kind of places for that respite and solitude in the city, getting away from the built world a little bit. Picnicking and lunch doesn't support that real strongly at this point, but there are people that come out to do that, and that's something that we observed as a part of this process. Recreation with dogs. It may not be a formal dog park, but I would challenge you to find a day that there isn't a dog down there at some stage in the day. Water and shore recreation. This is kind of a specialized category that really recognizes your relationship with the bay. This is a great spot to get access to that beach and to the bay beyond. Enjoying nature views and scenery seems a little obvious. Walking, jogging, and bicycling is really supported primarily by this. Can serve as a bit of an informal trailhead on San Francisco Bay Trail. And beyond that, the trail actually passes through this park. And so the development of that trail through this park is part of the facilities that are supporting this. And as we all know, this is what Point Emery pretty much looks like. There's not a whole lot out there, but it does support a wide variety of activities. So how do you apply this to a site that isn't built yet? So Major Park Site 2, if you remember, extends up Hollis at the site of the PG&E building and north. An early conceptual design that was looking at a little bit different layout of that, kind of talked about some of the things that could fit on that site. But the program that we determined really made sense here included those basics, definitely included sports. I think that taking the opportunity to take advantage of these larger sites to provide some of those larger facilities was an important message that we heard from the community and would be validated by common sense. There's also some trade-offs in there. It seems like this might be a good spot for a small enclosed dog park or possibly a community garden kind of project. Now that's a facility that would fit. Those are facility decisions that would help serve this these activities, recreation with dogs or gardening. There are probably other ways that we could meet those needs without necessarily a 100 by 100 fenced off little area or a 20 plot community garden, but those are some ideas that have been floating around. This would also be a site that could support special events. Again, this is partly about its size, but it would be about the way that it was designed. And I'm not, just as I say this, I want to clarify that this conceptual that I put on there as an illustration is not representing necessarily what's included in this program. It was just some earlier work to kind of illustrate the space of the site. Exercise and fitness, really supporting the day-to-day exercise routines of Emeryville citizens, and another opportunity for art in your community. And I think that you guys are doing a great job of taking advantage of those opportunities. Another interesting example, as we talk about these other park opportunities, these are the small sites that are going to help fill in the opportunities for close to home park and recreation opportunities. And in these cases, what we're talking about are some sites that will expand on an existing park in your community. And really we wanted to think about that. In addition to the activities that are supported and that should be supported at Stanford Avenue Park, these sites open up some new opportunities, possibly adding some space for games or challenge activities. And this is another one that probably requires a little definition. We differentiated from sports some of the activities that are really more about challenging yourself to do better. So you don't necessarily compete against other people. You could think about climbing, skateboarding, BMX, some of those kinds of things. People will talk about adrenaline sports or extreme sports sometimes. I'm not sure if those necessarily capture all of the possibilities. As we were indicating here, some of the best climbing features that we see in parks these days are, only about this tall. I wouldn't exactly call that extreme, but they're great fun, and they are about challenging and learning about your body. Adding opportunities to view art, and then again, just emphasizing that this is also going to include all of those activities that would be supported by Stanford Avenue Park. And so I'm kind of curious at this point, just if there's any questions about the activities or the points that we're kind of starting to match up here. I've got a little bit more about what the how this fits into then becoming a plan, but I wanted to make sure that we weren't leaving anything behind in terms of a question specifically about these examples or maybe about another site that you're thinking about. Is there anything that anybody wanted to bring up at this point?
I've got some just general comments about things, but is this the time for that?
There's definitely some questions that I specifically want to get to, and I want to make sure we have time for. I would imagine that we'll probably capture some of that as well.
We should probably get through the presentation and then hear comments from the audience. Okay. And then the commission can discuss.
Great. So where we're really taking this is from these community needs, from this preliminary site program to a strategic plan, to a path that gets you from where you're at to this vision that you've laid out in the general plan, and the things that are going on right now. This is not, what we're going to be doing next month. This is happening, this was happening today. We're working on the specific strategies that can help you get there. We had some brainstorming with both staff and your ad hoc committee. We're drawing back to the public input. Some of the best ideas about how to make things happen actually come from inspiration that people wrote into surveys and questionnaires. We will be talking about conceptual design for these sites, talking about everything from bubble diagrams to the kinds of drawings that you've seen a little bit of that illustrate the relationships between some of these activities and where and how big they would need to be to work on these sites. And then design guidelines, some of the technical things like making sure that we don't end up with leftover sites in major development projects. I think that that's a really important one to think about. You want to have street frontage, you want to have good visibility, you want to have good integration with the site. From that, we're going to be able to develop a specific capital improvement plan and an operations plan. I want to link those two together in your mind because we've been telling communities up and down the West Coast and hearing it from communities up and down the West Coast that we can get things built. The challenge ultimately in the long term is sustaining these projects and making sure that we can continue to operate them, we can continue to maintain them. And we'll be bringing back then a draft plan that pulls all of this together for review, and it will go back through this process of bringing it to you folks and a revision and bringing it to council as well with a revision ahead of time with the ad hoc committee, making sure that we're still on the right path with everything. I want to emphasize that our intention for this final plan is to give you all as planning commissioners, city staff, the council, a lot of tools to help you specifically deal with the challenges that we see ahead, and a very usable document. The document you see in front of you is kind of the heavy analysis piece of the whole puzzle, and it does a lot of stepping us through one thing at a time, and I don't want you to get too concerned that we're going to get bogged down in that in this plan. We intend very strongly to make this a very usable document that continues to be useful. And so I've got a few general questions that I kind of want to throw out that might help frame some ideas from the audience as well as from the Planning Commission. The general comments about, well, did we get this kind of right about these activities in the sites? Are there places where you see conflicts or confusion about why we might have said there's potential on a site or this should be a part of the program? There's where should the plan be strong and where should the plan be flexible? those two pieces are very important from where you sit. I'm sure it's where do we need to make sure that we're pushing for certain things or certain sites, certain activities, and where do we need to be real flexible to make sure that we can make these things happen?
That's kind of a question that went through my mind. I read the report, and I think it's fantastic.
Well, thank you.
You can get a good master's degree from this report.
Well, we'll see.
I learned a lot about the potential for activities in the recreation field. But in looking at each site, did you look at the very uses of the site just by the physical presence of the site, and how much input was that people will use? How did you determine that people will actually use what you're building? If it was all built just on whether the physical size of the site and the environment around it, how do you put into the factor that anybody will want to use the site?
Yeah. And this is a trick, and it's always a trick when you're working from the present, looking out, 20, 25 years. You can't even ask the people who are here now necessarily, because a lot of the people who are going to be using these sites haven't even been born yet. And where that really falls in my mind is right under this third bullet right now, which is where does this plan need to be flexible? We've tried to design these activities to encompass a general range of, how many synonyms for activity can I come up with? But a general range of activities that captures something essential about why we want to be using the park system, but doesn't get so specific that it is skateboarding. Because 25 years ago, we would not have realized that skateboarding was going to be such a driving force in this field. And it is. It is a huge driving force, one of the most participated in activities in the country. So we're trying to create a range that will survive that test of time. And the important part of the strategies is that we're not going to just pick out of a list, okay, so this park should have sports, so it's going to be baseball. What part of the strategy is to make sure that when we come back to, okay, now we have site one, we're ready to go. It still requires some additional work with your community about what specifically needs to go in there. We've got a general path set out. What within this kind of range are we really looking at? Excuse me.
It's not you.
So I hope that gets at your question a little bit.
Well, I was thinking of a much simpler example. I live next to the Davenport Mini Park, and there are tables there, and there's water access there, but not much used. And one of your proposals is to increase the use. How do we know? How do we determine that that's necessary?
Okay. I would say that in the grand scheme of things, if we could have everything that we wanted, we might add some activity to that park if we could. Now, I think that what you're saying is right now it's a constrained site. It's a small thing. There's kind of a limited purpose to that site at this point.
And it's not fully used.
And it's not used very heavily at this point. I would say that what you would want to be matching up is what facilities would you add based on what objective you're trying to get to. Are you trying to improve services for people who live next door? That's an objective that really would come out of these strategies, and as opposed to the needs. There's an opportunity there that we've identified. Now, whether you would go out to take that opportunity is part of the questions that the decision-making criteria and the strategies that we're developing right now. Do you have any input on what what would make you want to improve that park as opposed to leaving it alone or to changing the configuration of it? Maybe even limiting down to just being a part of the path.
So you would have consultation with people in the neighborhood.
Certainly.
Well, for example, I think instead of adding more tables, you might add other things, like a child play area. Might attract people. So that's the type of thing where you would vary.
And so we would be able to give you some tools to kind of see that decision through. So what would that mean in terms of increase in operations cost for the overall park system? And then you can weigh that against, would we rather have that playground here, or would we rather have that over at Marina Park, which is nearby but not as nearby, or would we rather make that investment somewhere else. And so I know it's not quite the simple and clear answer of yes, you should put a playground in that park, but the answer ultimately is it's a decision that you will have to make. And what we want to provide you is a path and some decision-making tools to see that decision through so that you can make an informed decision and not just necessarily respond to, Chairperson Hoff, not as planning commissioner, but as resident, coming in saying.
So your report basically kind of concentrates on the physical possibilities of the park. But in terms of human needs and desires, that's still something we have to decide.
This report does focus a lot on the potential, the physical potential of the site to support these activities. I think that we will be bringing back in a lot of what we did learn from the public about what currently is desired. Now, that doesn't eliminate the challenge that I alluded to earlier, which is that a lot of those people, may not be here when ultimately that's built or not. There is a certain amount of it that needs to be dealt with closer to the time that will actually be in place.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any other questions?
I don't know if we're going to comment on these two first bullet points. I would just say that the report was comprehensive in that it, took each site and, basically told us what was there and what could be used there based on the community and the community input, and that was great. So, it's recreation, it's activities, it's not, I have a degree in recreation, so I won't say it's rocket science. But on the second bullet point, where should the plan be strong? It's really the deficiencies throughout the city. We're not a big city. What are the things that we need in the parks that are that should come out of this report, and where can they fit in some of the major parks or some of the identified sites? And most notably, it's like obvious things that we're missing: sports facilities, places to picnic or to congregate that are safe. I live over by Temescal Park. Unlike that small park you're talking about, which I wouldn't even call a park, it's more of a hangout spot. I live next to one of the bigger, for our city, parks that's very underutilized, extremely underutilized, because it's not safe and there's nothing to do there, and is limited by some of the things that aren't allowed to happen there, like off-leash dogs, or there's no lighting, so no nighttime activity, and it's constrained by accessibility from Adeline and from a couple other streets. So, again, going back to that second bullet point, where should this plan be strong? It's the deficiencies, really, that this plan should be strong.
Okay, thank you.
I'm glad to see the flexible aspect being brought in. That's one of my concerns. And I guess in an overall kind of thing is I see this as a living document. And I think one of the things I heard tonight is the targeting, having this completed before the CIP. I think that's really wonderful.
They're supposed to.
But at the same time, I think there are some other plans that are going on there. The alternative transportation plan and the bike ped plan, and they all tie into this.
Could we limit it just to comments so we can get the public before we go on at great length?
Okay.
I think if you have a few questions, I think it's fine. I probably overdid it and set a bad example.
You did, Art.
I set a bad example, but I've been reminded by my co-commissioner that we need to let the public speak before we get too involved.
Okay, so I guess an overall question in that vein would be, is there flexibility to changing these? We've got some circles on the map.
Mm-hmm.
What's the flexibility of changing those as conditions change?
So there's a couple of circles on the map. There's the circles that were drawn by the general plan process that are kind of the wheres, and those circles are general. They're not, as you all know, they're not intended in most cases to be a specific point, except to the extent that the city has purchased land in certain areas. The other circles are really identifying opportunities. Now, the reality is that is a snapshot in time, because as development occurs, the situation around that site may well change. You guys have seen dramatic change in 10 or 15 years, and I would say that there should be opportunities to revisit things. That said, you also, as you all know, as planning commissioners, you need to set a path and start moving in a direction. And What we want to do is provide you with the tools to adapt as you go. And hopefully, as I said, the decision-making tools that we'll be able to throw at this will guide you well, even where either time has passed or the situation has changed to the point that the path that we kind of started off on maybe is not exactly right, and we need to shift or make some exceptions. And I think that as long as you can make those exceptions informed by the information that we've gathered here, I think that we've done a reasonable job. So, because I can't plan for all eventualities, but I want to be able to give you guys the tools that'll help you adapt as you go.
Was that your presentation?
That is my presentation. At this point,
Don't go away.
I know I'm not going anywhere, but I do want to hear what all of you have to say. So if there's
Once we hear from the public, we may want to ask you some questions. Okay, this is not a public hearing, but it is a study session, and anybody who would like to speak to this point, please come forward. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes. Anybody wish to talk? Pardon? That's fine. Come
Questions
forward.
are fine too.
You have to speak into the
You can-
microphone,
you-
sir.
You can ask your questions to the commission, and then after everyone has spoken, we'll ask the consultant to respond.
Good evening. My name is John Nemec. I've been a resident of Watergate
You live
for
in Watergate?
many years. I just recently moved out. But I have a question for the gentleman. When you displayed on the screen basically your chart saying that we are here right now, we started in 2009, how do we get there? Now, when you have this chart in front of you, what type of time frame are you looking at usually? Have you done this also,
Well,
in the past?
Can you
Yeah.
address your questions to the
Yeah,
commission,
what's
please?
the-
And then he will answer when everyone
Yeah,
has
what is
finished.
the time frame usually for the developing of the park?
Of which park? The
I
whole
mean,
plan.
of the park and recreation,
From my point of view, I think it's at least a 20-year plan.
I see.
And subject to the availability of funds. As the gentleman pointed out, we're going to make plans, we're going to prioritize them, and we have two problems. One is the capital thing,
Yes.
which is less of a problem. But the other problem is maintenance. Right now, we can't maintain what we have, so with those constrictions, it'll be longer or shorter before we develop this plan. But the general, wasn't it a 20-year general plan? So we're looking at a 20-year time span.
Yes. Now, second question is this, like you indicated that you were not really sure that the residents of Emeryville want a park. How did the park get into discussion? I mean, is it because cities want parks or because the residents require a park?
Are you talking about all the parks?
No, just the park plan for Emeryville. I mean,
Okay.
did it come into being because the residents have been asking for a park?
We had a general plan study committee that's working on this for about 2 years.
Okay.
And it was a consensus of the committee that this was the proposed park plan. It was put into the general plan, hearings were held, public hearings were held. It was also considered by the city council as the proposed plan for parks for the city. So it was quite a continuous process. And this
Great.
was the result.
Chair Hoff, I just would want to add here that the general plan process it was more than 2 years. It was
Please
closer to
correct me.
5 years. And part of our planning process, as we were looking to the future of what Emeryville needs,
Yes.
is park and open space land. This city is underserved. And in order to sustain families in Emeryville and to allow recreational opportunities for everyone at every point in your life, the steering committee for the general plan felt it was very important to integrate a park system and identify opportunities for new parks to meet that underserved need. And as part of our general plan process, we did extensive outreach and we heard back many times from the public about what they would like to see. And at the time, we wanted to provide that information a little bit more detailed in the general plan, but we were moving forward with that. So at the direction of the city council, we moved forward with this park and recreation strategic plan.
Okay, thank you for your
Okay,
comments.
thank you very much.
I'm sure there'll be other opportunities for you to address each individual park as they come before the council or the planning commission for approval.
Thank you.
I'm Larry Farb. I'm a property owner in Emeryville since 1985, and we have property on 66th and 67th Street in Emeryville. I'd like to thank the city, especially Diana and Charlie, and the Planning Commission for coming up with this idea of increasing the parks. We've been involved both in business and as a property owner for many years, and we've watched the changes in Emeryville all to our delight, and we're very pleased with that. But I do have a question. I'm new to this process.
Is your property residential or?
No, it's commercial property. It's almost 3 acres. We're one of the largest we're in the industrial zone now that was recently made by the plan.
You're in the industrial area.
Industrial area, right. On the corner of Hollis and 66, between 66th and 67th. And in the plan, we noticed, this is how it came to our attention. Unfortunately, we didn't, and I'm not saying this to be negative, I just didn't get noticed for the general plan meeting, because we didn't get noticed at our home. We're not at our property, and so we were unaware of the meetings. But when we did see the plan after the fact, we saw a letter right over our property saying it's designated as a potential park. And so we're still a little bit confused. We got a good explanation from Charlie telling us that the letter designation in the general plan didn't necessarily mean there was going to be a park on our property. It could be anywhere in the vicinity. But listening to the consultant today, I'm still a little confused if these sites have actually been designated now, these potential park sites on particular parcels. My understanding is they haven't been.
No, that's not true. I think Charlie's explanation is correct. That C site means that somewhere in that area, depending on the availability of land, the prospects of it, we would like to see a park. But we haven't designated any specific property for that park.
Okay, well, that's good to hear, because our property, sometime in the future, I'm getting older, I'm in my 60s now. Sometime in the future, since I'm reaching the point of, I guess...
Someday in the future, you may want the city to buy your property.
Well,
that would be a perfect opportunity.
Well,
Opportunity for us to build a park.
Well, who knows? But, you know, we actually, and, you know, if we did develop the property, we'd want to talk to the city and do what's best for everybody, you know. But we're reaching the point in our lives, we're retired now, we're older, and we always plan to sell the property as part of our, you know, long-range planning.
The main reason we made them circles rather than identifying specific parcel is to avoid the fear of people thinking exactly what you were afraid of, that your property is designated for,
right,
and it's not.
Well, I was particularly scared because the circle landed on my property, like a flying saucer.
I'm sorry, you said
it just
what?
Came out of the sky and landed right on the property.
You would prefer what?
He was concerned because it's sort of plopped on his property.
Okay,
the circle is actually on my property.
Thank you so much for your comments.
Okay, so I have one last. So one day we will develop the property, and we're just concerned that it might, you know, put a cloud on our property or ambiguity, you know, that circle is there. So we'd like to know how we get involved in the process to, you know, to get our input. No one's asked us for our particular input.
Thank you.
Okay.
Any other comments?
Hello, my name is Joseph. I work with Living Hope Christian Center here for 4550 San Pablo, and I live right off 37th, right on the border of Oakland, Emeryville. First of all, I'd like to say great job with the Hollis Doyle Park. It was a wonderful Earth Day celebration there. It was amazing. It was a really, really good job, and it's awesome to be a part of this. We work a lot with children and youth, and I want to say thank you again, commend you in all the work.
Where are you located, sir?
4550 San Pablo Avenue.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I work with Living Hope Christian Center there. And we work a lot with the children and youth, and we have parking lot space, and we see tons of kids coming in, skateboarding, you know, doing different things because of the facilities. But one, I wanted to say thank you and commend you in the work, and as well as the activity that's going into looking into the public voice and community. And I guess coming in, forgive me if I've missed some of the meetings and things, but we want to know what is it that we can do as a church, as a local organization, to partner with Parks and Recreation in helping develop that partnership in whether it's input, whether it's getting involved with the community to help with the needs and see what needs are more out there in order to help see this kind of stuff come to pass.
The director of our Park and Recreations is sitting over there.
Yeah.
And I suggest you talk to her, and I'm sure
Great.
she might have some ideas for you.
That would be awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, another part of this planning process is going to involve looking at potential partnerships, I believe, and opportunities, because we are a small city that is really short on park space right now, and as the population grows and we get more dense, we want to look at creative ways to provide recreation for the
Yeah.
residents here. So I think
Great.
that there will be opportunities, and we'll be looking for opportunities to find people that want to work with the city to
Awesome.
fulfill those needs.
Awesome. And then the real quick question is, we have an area within our lot, and I talked actually with Diana Kina about this a bit. We're looking to landscape. Now, I don't know if I would talk to someone, you can maybe turn me to somebody personally, but we were looking to create a landscape as well as, park benches, barbecue pits and things like that to have. We know it's a private lot, private property area, but who would I speak to, I guess, for the restrictions? We want it to be open to the public because of the needs that we see within our community. But what does that look like as far as that dynamic?
You're a tenant in the building on 45th and San Pablo at the yellow building?
Yeah.
Yeah, they used to be the Elizabeth Arden.
Mhm.
And the adjacent property is I believe, entitled 29 unit townhome project.
Yeah.
So I think that's the lot you're talking about.
Yeah.
What is it, vacant?
Oh, it's vacant.
Yeah, it's vacant. There's
Oh, that's
permits
the
that
one
been
that's-
given out.
We
to
approved
build.
that for 29.
I would talk to the owner of your property
Okay.
about
Okay.
that and have him discuss with the
Yeah,
adjacent
yeah.
property owner.
Well, we talked with they're allowing us to kind of do the land. My question is, if we had a landscape, I guess what would be the dynamic of allowing the public to come in, liability, different things like that? Who would I speak with that?
That would be
You can-
Charlie
You can come
Bryant.
talk to us, talk to our staff about it.
Great, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
We're not going to give you legal advice, though.
Hi, I'm Lauren Westreich, and I actually am a property owner on one of the sites that's actually been designated as a park. So I'm not just a circle, I'm actually been X'd off.
Where are you located?
And site number 1.
Number
The
one.
big park.
Adjacent to Doyle Hollis
The
Park.
main site.
Right. And what concerns me, and we were not noticed either, the residents got a lot more notice than the business owners did, and we had no idea that our properties were being designated as a park, and I wanted to come up and speak and let you know that there are real live people with real live livelihoods on the table here, and our futures are being dramatically impacted by circles and squares and numbers on a map, and there's real people behind those things. And while we value and appreciate the fact that the city wants to have more parks and more recreation available for people in the city, I want you to remember that there's real people involved, and it's not just there are no empty sites on those blocks. They're completely built up and completely utilized, and people are running businesses and have livelihoods at stake. And I just want to mention that and have that be part of the conversation as we move forward. And now that we're aware of it, obviously I will be at all the meetings and be a part of, as the parks plans go forward. But I would encourage you to look at developing some of the existing sites more fully before you turn around and tear down buildings and take people's livelihoods away.
Well, I certainly couldn't agree with you more. We have lots to do with the existing sites, and the city does have a policy where they will not acquire private homes. So this is really
It's
just
business. They're all business.
all business.
It's all business.
I might ask the city attorney to comment. I don't believe this impacts your rights or privileges to use your property in any way.
Well, that's up for discussion.
No, there's also a whole relocation. There's also a whole eminent domain and relocation laws protection for property owners. So there's a whole process that would go through if the city was going to undertake buying property for a park.
Right, but our concern is, in the meantime, what's going to happen and how we can plan for the future. And, I love the fact that it's a 20-year plan. I'd like to know that our property was going to be 20 years out and not 5 years out, and how we would know as the plan moves forward, like how quick you are going to be to move on any of those proposed, plans.
My own opinion, it is not a very high priority item.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else?
Good evening. My name is Scott Robinson. I own a building at 62nd and Hollis next to the park at 61st. Currently, as Lauren mentioned, there's about 10 property owners in the Site 1 park area that is all improved property. I have a 17,000-foot warehouse there that's housed Gasket Specialties, a tenant in Emeryville for over 25 years. As a result, currently his lease is coming up in August. He has opted not to renew that lease and is going to probably move to Oakland, West Oakland, as a result of the down zoning to open park space. So while exactly what Lauren said, there is impacts already going on as a
Excuse me,
result.
You said a down zoning?
Down zoning, these are industrial, commercial properties. They're not open sites, they're not raw land. And as a result of the proposed park and the zoning being changed, tenants are already vacating their properties. And being a commercial broker in this area, and I had my offices in Emeryville for quite a number of years and have brought a lot of companies into this town, I can tell you as a broker, my other co-brokers are already telling me, Robinson, no tenant is going to want to now rent your property because they're fearful that it will be condemned in the near future. So I know, Arthur, that you mentioned that it may be 20 years out, but we are working with Charlie and the city now because these are serious issues that are being presented to us with our commercial properties. And I understand the eminent domain and condemnation, as even my family has had an acre taken away down at Bay Shellmound, 4-year process and no settlement there yet. So there are some things we'd like to work with the city and work out, and if the park, I think we all support the park and we understand the rights of the city with eminent domain. You can always take our properties away. But to not put a cloud on our properties so tenants will leave and we'll end up with vacant buildings that we cannot rent and blight, that's a problem. Or the other solution is, as I said in another council meeting, is if you truly want the properties, then let's settle up and write the checks now and we'll reinvest our monies into other cities or other properties in our 1031 exchanges. So with that, I hope the dialogues will continue because there is impacts. And even John Nemec here, who is a client of mine, long and short of it is he's got a financing issue coming up. And I had lunch with head of Bank of the West Regional the other day, and he said, Scott, that's a real cloud on title. When you have a property that's now an open park zone and it's a commercial property, bank's not going to want to refinance or lend on the property. So you get a $2 million note call, you got a problem. So I know these are things sometimes we don't think about planning out, but I think there will need to be some discussion, and I know all the owners here are willing to talk with the city, work with Charlie, and figure this thing out. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi there. Hi, my name is Lloyd Kinoshita. I live on the border 46 and Adeline. I'm in View 46, one of the
View
voting
46?
units. Yeah, right there. Half of us are Emeryville and half of us are Oakland. And I just wanted to support, I think, what Frank was saying, in that we live by the Temescal Creek Park. And we do want to see maybe what's working and what's not working with some of the parks, and how to improve what's not working to, make parks.
Do you have some specific comments about?
Sure,
those
it's like you said. I mean, it's some of the parks are more of a hangout area, and there are other things that maybe it's underutilized. You see this on the report. There are different things for the Temescal Creek Park they're talking about, such as opening up to the streets, creating more street space. All these things might help bring more life, but the report itself, I didn't really see necessarily what was wrong with some of these places, and maybe things that we could do to help improve it versus spending money on bringing in new facilities or new areas to the park.
Do you feel, this came up before, do you feel having access from Adeline Street to Temescal Creek Park would improve the situation?
I think it's a start. It could be something that could improve it.
Where you get better circulation through the park?
Right, it could. But that could just be one thing.
Mhm.
I also want to say that I also recognize that different parks are all unique, and they all have different cultures to them. And some of these parks are right at the border between Emeryville and Oakland. And so all the people who use these parks might not just be Emeryville. It could be people who are in Oakland and have different ideas about what they want to use the park for. And I think we have to recognize that and sort of take that into account, because it might just not be Emeryville residents who come and use these areas.
Thank you very much
Yeah.
for your comments.
Thank you.
Is there anybody else who would like to speak?
There is a sign-in sheet that has gone around, that's going around for people who have spoken, because we just like to have people sign in so that you can be recorded.
Thank you. We should
Okay,
have mentioned that.
We'll conclude with the public comments. The committee doesn't have any comments? John?
Yeah, overall, excellent job on the plan. I think this is really wonderful, the draft that you've.
Could you come back up to the microphone? I think we're going to need you.
I really like how it's organized, and I think it is a usable plan, the format that you're putting it together. There's, and I also want to thank the committee for working on this, because I think you've done a great job on that. There's one formatting issue kind of thing. It's not a big thing, but just I found it really inconvenient to have the maps on one page and then have to flip over to another page for the site information that went with that map. And I think it would be a lot more readable and workable if they faced each other. So that's a small thing. This is going back to the flexibility, but I think that it's really important that we tie this in with the bike ped plan, since better connections to parks is a big priority for this, and also connecting it to the alternative transportation plan. And I think it's definitely, we need to keep on that target of getting this completed before the CIP round of funding. But again, it is a living plan, and I think it has to be, and I think it might be a good idea to state that this is a living plan and that it will be modified as we make changes. And then another thing that related to that ties in are the design guidelines, and this is more of a design guideline kind of thing, but I think it's really important that in our design guidelines that we have a clear definition and an archetype set up for what a green street is, because I think these things are so interrelated that my vision of a linear park on Christie might be satisfied with defining the green streets and knowing that it's going to have lots of trees and will meet the same needs. Another general comment that somebody brought up, maybe we should mention the privately owned public open space. It touches on that, but maybe identify that as just another opportunity to create the open spaces. And I'm not sure how that works in with programming. I think you provided a great example of, you've got a church that has needs for a certain area. You're willing to work with the city to open up this private space, and so maybe it can be combined with the overall plan. On page 6, the locations of other park opportunities are generalized, and I think we need to, especially after hearing some of the comments tonight, generalized should get more emphasis. Let's see. There was, however, one recommendation that I would make as a generalized site that's shown on here is Site J. And I know this comes out of the Park Avenue District Plan, and I got involved in the Park Avenue District Plan at the tail end. And one of my things that I really pushed for was to make this a very general thing, and if not general, what I think is a better site for that is in the Sherwin-Williams undeveloped site. And I would really love to see that J moved over to the center of the Sherwin-Williams site. There's a UC Berkeley student that put together a conceptual design as one of his senior projects or something. And I brought a copy of that to the community meeting, and everybody at my table was really enthusiastic about that plan. So I think that's an opportunity site that really should be shown. And I think one of the things that it does is it shows an intent that as part of this big undeveloped parcel, this is an opportunity for a park, and it shows the intention that we do want a park here. So I think that's an important one. General things, I think maybe a little bit more emphasis on the microclimates in Emeryville. I live at Pacific Park Plaza right across the street from the Christie Avenue Park, and the weather there is incredibly different than just on the other side of the tracks, whereas pretty much right in that area is really, really cold and windy a lot of the time. And I think programming-wise, as far as what you put together here, I think you've really taken that into consideration a lot. But one that sticks out for me is Site B, a community garden possibility there. I don't think that particular site is suitable for that because of the wind. Another thing that I think could use a little bit more emphasis, and maybe a statement in the plan itself, that we talk about the importance of taking noise into consideration, especially the noise of the freeway and the railroad tracks. Because we've got some parks like Site I that's located right next to the railroad tracks. And one of the things that we have activities there is games, and I don't think that's really suitable at that site because of the noise of the railroad tracks. However, I think there's some possibilities for doing some noise mitigation, maybe there with a sound wall or something like that. And with the games, I think more emphasis should be put on pairing the games with commercial sites. One that comes to mind is the public market. I think is a great opportunity, and I think that whole area, it again is an area where I think it's a site that has a great deal of potential, but I think where the park is shown now doesn't really work very well with the uses that are going on in that building. I think there would be fantastic opportunities to put a kids park right outside the door of where the little kids area is inside the public market. I think that's also a quiet and sheltered spot on the street that would be great for eating lunch and creating more of a natural area. So I think that's a specific site that isn't really shown on here, but I think it has great potential.
John, I thought that the location of the parks were the preview of the council and the planning commission. I don't think that one of the consultants' jobs was to comment on that, was it?
Well, I think part of this is to look for potential sites. And I think that's one that hasn't been identified as a potential site.
They were asked to look at potential sites?
Well, we've taken the lead primarily from the established and adopted general plan sites.
Right.
And so there are a few opportunities where we have identified things that maybe were not considered during the general plan. There are a few sites that are mentioned in the analysis overall that were not brought up in the general plan process.
What's an example?
An example would be the, well, not specifically as a park was brought up in the general plan, but the area underneath the Powell Street, where Powell Street crosses the freeway.
I think that's a great example.
It is an area that, in getting to know the community, we started seeing some opportunity there. There wasn't an existing designation, and so we wanted to illuminate that we had seen some potential there, and so that was an example. Another one, let's see, there were a couple of smaller ones that we started identifying that were maybe a little more obvious, like East Shore State Park, where it's an opportunity. It's not necessarily an Emeryville opportunity alone, but it's an opportunity. It's a little bit more obviously a park opportunity, though.
And that's really my big concern, Art, is that this is a living document, again, going back to that this is going to change. And I don't want us to be so fixed. I think it's great that we have some, potential sites areas, general areas, emphasis on general, defined on here, that we have to have that as a starting point. But we also need to have the flexibility that I don't want us to go forward and say, we've got a park shown at this site B, that is where the park is going to be.
Well, I think we've made it clear that those are just generalized locations and it could be anywhere in that area.
I think we have, but I just want to emphasize, I want to give that great emphasis because I've seen what happens, and an example to me is the pedestrian bridge at 65th Street. It's like, somehow something gets shown on a map and we say, oh, it's shown on this map, so of course it's got to be here, when other sites that maybe make more sense get taken off the table. So my comment on that. And the last comment is two comments. One is the separate off-leash area for Christie Avenue, the park there. I think that's a fantastic idea. You noted there's some constraints to that because of the what it does to the grass and everything. One of the things to consider there might be that the size of the dogs that are typically there, like in PPP, there are size restrictions.
Yep.
So the density of dogs can probably be a lot higher than what would normally be taken into account.
That's a good point.
And then the last comment is, I really like the idea of the skate park underneath the overpass, but my concern is how do we safely get kids there?
It's a trick. It's a trick.
But that all does tie into the bike ped plan also. So, so great job.
Thank you.
Yes.
Chair Hoff, I'd just like to respond, if I may, to a couple of Commissioner Sherman's comments.
Please.
On J on Park Avenue and Sherwin-Williams. Perhaps what the general plan and what these park diagrams don't adequately illustrate is the amount of area on the Sherwin-Williams site and vicinity that is already designated as open space. The Sherwin-Williams property itself is about 8 acres, of which I think about 3 acres are currently designated as open space on the general plan.
As a park?
As open space,
Open space.
in the general plan, in addition to the greenway line going through, and also in addition to the patch of green that is shown on this map, which is owned by the city. And in the past, there's no current application for a development of the Sherwin-Williams site on the table at the moment, but there was, as you may recall, several years ago. And what we told them at that time, and what we would tell them again today, is that that open space doesn't necessarily have to be in the exact configuration that's shown on the general plan map. It can be moved around as long as we don't lose any, as long as it's the same amount of open space or more. And we've also told them that we would consider swapping the city-owned land, which is designated as open space, for development land if you put that amount of open space somewhere else. So between that open space that's already designated and the greenway through here, I think there's ample room for fairly sizable park land on the Sherwin-Williams site as is, without having to move the J circle off of Park Avenue. It's not an either or. I think we can have both. Oh, and the other thing I was going to say is, this has not ever been explicitly mentioned. It has been mentioned that these circles are generalized and that their exact locations is not determined. But another thought that occurs to me is that perhaps they could be, some of them might morph into 2 little circles as opposed to 1 bigger circle. So for example, the circle D, maybe instead of being in that location, maybe it could be 2 smaller parks, one of which is in the location you're suggesting and the other one of which is here on this site. It's just an indication that this area north of Powell and west of the railroad and south of 64th is underserved and needs more open space.
And that might be helpful if we put some wording in there that kind of reflects that,
Sure.
that these things could morph into 2 circles instead of 1 in that general area.
Charlie and I were talking about that today, actually, and about the kind of greenway and park segments through the Sherwin-Williams site, and making sure that we're clear on that in the final plan. I have just 1 or 2 points of clarification that I wanted to make, and one is that just to reiterate, the document that was provided to you in your package today is not the strategic plan. It's an interim document that was produced as a part of the process to getting there, and so there's material that will be used certainly in that. There's still a lot of opportunity for this to shape, because as I said in the earlier part of the presentation, we've identified a lot of the opportunities now, and the piece that we're moving towards right now is which opportunities are we going to grab, which ones are we going to grab first, which ones are going to move down the ladder. And one of the things, and one other point that I wanted to make about spots on maps is that, because this is something that we run into when we do park and recreation plans all over the country right now, and this is something we run into all over the country, because you're caught in a trap between needing to indicate something on a map, because the only sure thing that you know in planning is that if it doesn't get onto a map somehow, nobody will ever remember that it's there when the time comes to ask the developer for it or to purchase the land when the opportunity rises. But are you indicating a specific property or a general property is always a difficult thing. We've tried every kind of mapping convention you can think of, and ultimately there's always some challenge to the underlying property. In this case, because you're such a small city, it's kind of in that much brighter relief because every parcel is visible on a map like this. It's a little bit harder to be general. And I just wanted to let people know that it's very typical in these plans that we would make a strong effort to say in the strategies, what opportunities are we going to grab, what opportunities we're going to move forward with, that we make very clearly what the city's preferences are towards, I think it was mentioned today about, not losing any housing or moving people out of existing housing, but also that we are not, either we are or we are not interested in buying from anybody but a willing seller. Those kinds of statements are fairly common in these plans. That's the kind of direction that we're still taking at this point, and we're listening to this conversation. We're definitely still getting feedback from staff, from the ad hoc committee, from yourselves. Just wanted to make that clear that that's still in the realm of possibility in this planning process. We're developing those strategies right now. So that's this is very timely input.
Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
Do you other comments from other commissioners?
Yeah, I just to back off that, it's a study session, and maybe the commissioners and staff can sit here and extrapolate on these plans and understand how schematic they are and how early in the ideation phase we are. But then, of course, property owners and homeowners and concerned citizens are going to come in here and worry that the letter is on their parcel. But the way we look at it, I hope, is that we understand that these are very general, and there's plans that have to be made. There's certainly huge real estate negotiations that have to be made. Willing sellers, willing prices, willing to move sort of things. And so these are general. When you have a letter that's circled in right over your house, as opposed to having a hashed mark designated site, there's a lot of room for interpretation there. So I'll just keep going with my comments. I agree with John that this is a great start, great document. It's difficult to read because of the number of maps and such, but in light of the economy and printing things up and everything, just do the best you can. But you can figure it out. It just need a couple more glasses of wine, maybe. Let's see some of my comments. There's no real mention of connections, but I think that integration is the word you used. Connection's a big thing that we're all talking about, and certainly the general plan process and bikes and pedestrian plan. Connection's a huge thing. We're such a small city. It's a vision of this city to be able to walk from east to west and north to south unimpeded, fairly safe, and through some sort of green corridors. So I think you understand that, but I think that's the will of the steering committee and what the planning commission has wanted, and certainly what city council, we lost our city council, city council has wanted. So connectivity is a word that we used a lot, I remember, and it looks like integration is the word you're using. Same thing, same idea, especially for me, the Temescal connection, which seems to be a little more difficult than the very I think successful Greenway, what we're doing north to south right now. There really wasn't a lot of talk about access and security. There's not much that we can do, I guess, as a city to make things more secure, but there's a lot of things in the way of landscaping and gates and proximity to neighborhoods, lighting that can make a park more usable. And my neighbor in View 46 was probably here to talk about Temescal Park, and Temescal Park is just a strange, wonderfully beautiful park that's not used because of accessibility and lighting. And there may be some other parks that have the same issues. And those are issues that changes in a park that could make it much more, just make people feel more safe, make it more usable, and then create a different dynamic in that park that will make people use it more. So a lot of my comments will refer to Temescal Park because I'm right across the street from it and I'm a Let's see. What else? Try and get through this fast. Off-leash areas, and I'm a dog owner. There's a lot of dog owners in Emeryville. There's a lot of dog owners in the world. And we've seen some regulation changes through some of the parks where, we got on-leash parks. Well, that creates people using other parks outside of the area to do that kind of thing. And I think there's ways that we can look into doing what neighboring cities, Oakland and Berkeley, have done. We're having caged areas or walking areas or off-leash dog areas. And maybe legal might have some issues with that, with dog biting and things like that might happen. But
We don't get involved in.
I like some of the ideas that you came up with in the pet area, and that it's actually separated out, because there's dogs and they're everywhere. And instead of shunning it and deciding that we can push it out to the larger dog parks, let's keep the users here and let's make it a dog-friendly place and pick up parks that are. And there are conflicting uses, and you've pointed some of those out. Garden and dogs don't mix, so those parks maybe are dog restricted and so forth. The pictures are all pretty. I don't want to get into typos or anything, but you did mention on page 38, Temescal Creek Park. It says if a feature is added to the east end of the park, the possibility of opening that area of the park to San Pablo would be explored. Definitely be add a line.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. I don't want to get into like typos and things like that, but since that is where I live, I thought I'd mention it. And the matrix at the end, I guess, was just confusing because it said trade-off, which I'm in real estate. Trade-off means a whole lot of things. I don't understand what trade-off means per se. You don't really have to tell me right now. But I guess what this means, because I heard you say it during your presentation, is that the blue diamonds are what's there at the property now, or what you believe to be is at that park now.
Let me clarify that really quick, because that is an important point on this this matrix. Is and as I said, I know that this is a difficult. It's a lot of
Can
information
you put that up
trying
on
to
the
organize
screen
it.
while you're talking about
Yep, I can. Let me get back in here. Let's bring it back. Sorry, that could have been done quicker. So the clarification of the blue and the green dots on there is that the trade-offs, the blue diamonds essentially were items that we believed should be included in the site program. So it should be a part of that. Those activities should be supported at that site for sure. Some of those do exist. In many cases, in most cases, all of the activities that are currently supported are represented there, but in most cases there are also a few more that are not currently supported but should be in our estimation based on the analysis of each site. The trade-offs essentially are, as you said, some of the conflicting uses where you would have to be making a choice and there's a little bit of explanation at the end, the final page of the document actually, that talks about where those trade-offs primarily occur. And most of them are in the proposed sites, in the proposed sites, because it's a little less clear what's there, how much space you're going to have. There are more trade-offs where you may well have one activity supported, but in doing that you've essentially used up the space that's likely to be there, and so you wouldn't do something else. But it would be good to do either of those essentially, and so we wanted to point those out. And so that's this matrix is difficult, and it was a difficult collection of information to try to summarize, because there's a lot here, and even within one of those dots there's still quite a bit of range, some of that flexibility we've talked about earlier in terms of the size of the thing that ends up supporting that activity. So you could be talking in sports, for example. This is a really classic example. You could be talking about a basketball court, which is a relatively small amount of space. You could be talking about a sports field, which is a relatively large amount of, an absolutely large amount of space. But both of those would be supporting the activity sports. So there's some flexibility within those categories as well. But the trade-offs we're really seeing kind of at a big scale, it's probably one or the other, either because of use conflict or perception of space.
Yeah, so it's just a long
It's
matrix that is talking about potential sites and current sites, and
in the final
I'm
plan
sure
at
you're
this-
going to, in the final document,
At
you'll
this
probably
point, what
break
we're
this all.
envisioning is a more site-by-site, textual and imagery-based description of what we're saying should happen at this site, and the recommendations for each of those sites.
On the existing matrix, what's there now, those dots don't necessarily mean that you have that facility. That's what you want.
Yes, yeah, for the existing parks, correct.
So some of them are there and some of them are
We
to
ac-
be there.
We actually do have in an earlier document a similar matrix that shows off how, if you were to take what is currently on the ground
Right.
and apply these activities to it, which ones are supported where, and we worked through that exercise as a preliminary to this with the committee, and talked about that, and that's something that it's kind of a good contrast to this, but I didn't think about actually the confusion there because, of course, you guys haven't all come along the whole way on that process, so I apologize for
When I looked
that.
at this the first time, I said, is this what's there or to be there? It's
Right.
It's
It's-
kind of both.
It's a little
I can
confusing.
totally understand that confusion. I
that matrix,
maybe a
that
little
original
more-
matrix would probably make sense to more
It would
people.
probably
What's
help.
there and what's planned.
It would
to
be
there.
more immediate. It would be more immediate for people for
My
sure.
last two comments, real quick, were: did you guys do park indicators? Did you send people out to the park and sit there for an hour or two and
Yes.
check off users?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. The staff, your staff, did a Herculean effort of that actually, and should be commended on that. It's something that wouldn't have been possible without their help. It's almost
Sorry,
never.
Charlie. Did you have to go to the park and hang out all day
Oh,
one day?
man. I sat at Temescal Creek Park all day one Sunday,
And just
documented every single
noted what
person.
everybody was doing.
And
Absolutely.
I sat there another day.
I wish I came by
and
that
Emery,
day.
Point Emery, and
God, that sounds
Big
terrible.
Big Daddy's Community Garden was
Herculean
fun.
effort.
Yes.
10
It actually-
10 hours, one person.
It's very tough work,
Really?
and but it was very rewarding, and it was heavily used in this process, figuring out what the current use was, having a good understanding of that on both weekday and a weekend day, at times throughout the day. We were really that was really a valuable piece of information that we rarely have that much detail to work with. So.
And my last comment was for staff. Could you, Charlie, quickly comment on the zoning change that the speaker had talked about? Just whether there was one or wasn't one or whatever, just for the
Well,
for the
yeah,
viewers.
If we're talking about Park 1, it was definitely rezoned. The entire city was rezoned.
Right.
Because the new land use map of the general plan is currently functioning as the zoning map under the interim zoning regulations. And so all of the zoning designations that used to be on the old zoning map have been replaced by the new designations in the general plan map. So for example, that particular park site used to be zoned IL light industrial. There is no IL light industrial zone anymore. That particular site is now zoned POS, park and open space, and it has different regulations than the IL zone did. And it does allow probably fewer uses than the IL zone allowed. I would note, however, that there is a policy in the general plan that says, explicitly says that uses in the large park site on the North Hollis area, which is this site, are permitted to continue as conforming uses until such time as the city may acquire the property for park
How
use.
about if there's destruction?
Well, conforming uses can be reconstructed.
Pardon?
Conforming uses can be reconstructed.
Okay.
But we are considering further amendments to address these issues.
Thank you. Thank you.
As I serve on the ad hoc committee, I've shared my comments, but I do want to emphasize one thing that we discussed at our last meeting. We're looking at the new capital improvements plan, and those usually go on 5-year cycles, and we do have limited resources. And it is important that we as a city, as a commission, and as a council begin to prioritize what we think is most important. And, you know, we've heard tonight that there are parks that we have now that are underutilized that we can further utilize and expand the use. I think we also need to educate our residents. I think in many instances, people don't even know where some of our parks are. So I think we need to begin that outreach. And speaking to the concerns of the property owners here this evening, thank you for attending the meeting, and we recognize your concerns. And this is about a 20-year plan, and we hope that we can build more parks for the residents and the business people that live here, because we have a number of people that go out at lunchtime from work and utilize the parks. And I believe that it's the intent of the city to work with all of you. And a comment that Commissioner Sherman made, identifying private parks or private open space, if you will, as development changes in the city over time and these sites are maximized, there's always going to be a possibility that the commission will be looking at ways to integrate open space and private recreation for those residents or businesses of that new development. So we want to maintain, you know, open conversations and lots of flexibility. And now that we've got all your names, we hope that you will be active participants in this planning process. Thank you.
Yeah, I also am on the committee and gave a lot of comments before to this draft, most of which were incorporated, but I think you did a wonderful job about looking at distribution of things and getting a good idea of what the current community is lacking and what people are looking for and interested in. I do think you need to show Aquatic Park on the maps, because it's a really big feature that needs to be fed into this balancing of where the distribution is and where the greater needs are, and it's going to help in prioritizing to keep that. Yeah, I mean, it's an adjacent facility that many residents use on a really regular basis. I'm glad to hear about the consideration of things like willing sellers and looking at that whole implementation piece, because that's really important. I think in this needs assessment and sort of opportunities place, I still would like to see more discussion about the possible joint uses and facilities that can be used and shared with the school district, because I think our community has worked really well with the school district to combine forces and to take advantage of what we have in our limited space that we have. So both discussion of the possible school facilities, and that's including the Center for Community Life, and the existing school sites, and also, you know, just addressing the possibilities of the privately owned publicly accessible, privately owned open spaces also. I think that's important in this initial part of the document, as well as in the implementation and the strategy coming forward. And I'm looking forward to a lot of discussion about how we prioritize these things.
That's the fun part.
I have two comments in two different areas. My feeling about the Temescal Creek Park is that it's kind of isolated and hidden and hardly known. I, for a while, have been promoting opening the park to Adeline Street and building a grand staircase down. In fact, I almost got the developer across the street to agree to participate, but I didn't get much support. Do you feel, it's a loaded question, obviously, but do you feel that opening the park would really enhance the usability and desirability of the park? Am I going in the wrong direction?
So there's a lot of theory around this. There's a lot of theory around this. And I would say that just opening the park is probably not enough. What we've heard a little bit in terms of commentary here, and definitely we've heard on the committee and from the public, is there needs to be more positive activity happening in that park to keep it safe. Ultimately, lights, video cameras, constant police patrols, and whatever else are not going to make that park feasible until there's people there using it in positive ways as much
which
time.
means we have to devote staff time for that.
Well,
purpose.
that would, if that was the route you were going. I think that it's not necessarily that you have to get out there and like drag people to that park. It's creating the opportunities. So we were talking today a little bit about some of the other opportunities adjacent to that as part of the Temescal Creek Greenway. And really, to me, one of the opportunities that I see is if it could be connected as part of a larger path, so that walking there is not walking 200 yards back and forth on one path, but it's actually a pass-through point on your way to something or a part of a longer corridor. I think all the research shows that the longer a trail segment is, the more it loops and interconnects. We talked about connectivity. The better it is. The more it gets used, the safer it is. And so the ideas that we're trying to draw out here are whatever we can add as possibilities that will build more regular interaction with this park for nearby residents, for residents of the city as a whole. And I think that opening the park is one of those possibilities. It's, there's a couple of other things that might actually work better if the park stayed kind of closed off. If you're going to fence in an area for a dog park, you could argue that fencing in the little bit that would require to completely fence in part of that park would be a pretty cost-effective way to make a fenced-in area. But that's only one consideration. There are various other activities. We tried to point out a few. Community gardening is one that brings people back to a site over and over again on a regular basis. Dog parks are probably the best example of that and have been used nationwide to almost as an active strategy to address challenging park locations, because everybody who has a dog knows that it's a regular thing. Once you're going, it's a regular thing, and you have to keep going there. And if it's, pretty much as I told Charlie and Diana earlier today, a dog park, if you have one off-leash dog park in a community, it hardly matters where it is. It will get use. It will get lots of use. Usually the challenge, if you only have one dog park in your community, is it getting too much use. That may be a good thing. It can overload a site. There are some other considerations that need to be kind of sussed out here, but I think that you're on the right path in terms of having that site closed off doesn't encourage more use right now. It doesn't create a through path. It doesn't create the connectivity that
the developer across the street of Adeline is using the Temescal Creek as a focal point of his development.
Mm-hmm.
He's making a faux creek, and it stops at the street. That way there could be a continuous, well, anyway, I guess that's a city policy. I have another question, and I'm not sure it's for you or the staff, but I'll ask it, and one or the other might respond.
Okay.
I assume that if we are going to get the most out of this park plan, that it's important to have private-public cooperation. And you mentioned private-public sites, but none are included in your presentation. And I specifically want to know why the Hollis Street Green Park is not included in your study. Why was that omitted? Is that we made a topology system not to do it?
No, the intention on that particular site really was that my understanding of the general plan designation of that site 2 was that it would include that site as part of it. Is that? I mean, that was my kind of general understanding. That would have been how I would have been, what I would have been operating from in analyzing that site. So I would have included that. I would have rolled that into
is
site
that
2.
part of 2?
That's correct. If you look at the
Why-
map on page
the hatching-
5, you can see that.
The hatching maybe is on the wrong level. It maybe should have been above the other
Yeah,
color. But
in view of the fact that 2 may be some time off,
this is true.
isn't it worthwhile to get, the park is not well utilized, and it could use a lot of the things you're talking about. Is there any reason why we can't include that?
I would say there's no reason not to include that in recommendations. I would say in terms of some of the ideas about criteria that have been starting to come up, might direct you away from putting a lot of money into it. One is if you're because it's a relatively small part of that larger site, it would be difficult to do much with it that didn't then end up getting torn out when you decided to do the larger site, even if that is further down the future. And the other part of it is relative to other sites, there's been a fair bit of investment from the private side in that site. Some small improvements may be really appropriate, but I wouldn't say it wouldn't right now, and I'm acting from preliminary information really, it wouldn't float to the surface as somewhere that relative to other sites in the park system would drive a whole lot of investment. Okay. That would be my best answer right now.
My other question has to do with two private parks.
Okay.
The one at the Transit Center and one at the what we call Emeryville East Triangle, both projects being built by the Wareham Construction Company. These are rather large parks, which I feel would benefit from your analysis. Is there any reason why we're not considering that as part of our park program? I don't know whether
the only answer that I would have at this point is just the.
Here's an opportunity presenting ourselves where we could do something with your proposals. It's and it's existing condition. We don't have to wait. We have a chance to put some of your proposals into action.
I guess the answer that I would have is to the extent that the city has leverage to implement things, I think there's a lot of thinking from nearby sites that could be pretty easily applied to it. In terms of why we didn't specifically analyze it, probably didn't get included mainly because it's not.
It wasn't approved at the time.
Yeah, it wasn't a city site,
a
city control site at the time.
Well, for example, I know that San Francisco has regulations and guidelines about what are required elements of the privately owned public spaces in terms of seating and movable site furnishings and things that you provide in those. And I think that this could be a good opportunity to incorporate some guidance on that.
Do we have an opportunity to do that in those things?
Not really, because both of those projects are entitled and one of them is already built. I mean, it would require
No, I'm talking about the Transit Center. It's not built.
I know. I said one of them is already built. That's Emery Station East.
I'm talking. The other one is the Triangle, which is not built either.
Oh, Emery Station Triangle?
The one
Greenway?
adjacent to the Greenway,
Yeah, the one next to the Greenway.
Well, that one doesn't have an elevated. If you're talking about the Greenway itself, they are going to be building the Greenway.
But there's also a park at the end of the property there.
That's going to be City Park.
It is a city park?
At the corner of Powell and Hollis?
Right.
Yeah, that will be city. That will be part of the Greenway.
Oh, I see, okay. But they're not. But they haven't analyzed that. Is that not worth being analyzed?
Well, it's part of the Greenway that's shown on the map here. And they do have recommendations for the Greenway.
That may be a point of clarification too. When we talked about the Greenway in this analysis, we were talking generally about kind of the full length of it as a concept. So we talked about each Greenway separately, but we didn't talk about each individual segment of each Greenway. So
I think that can be done as part of the Greenway.
Yeah, well, that would be rolled into recommendations about the Greenway.
But as far as the Transit Center, Wareham does not need any more approval from us on terms of the landscaping.
Correct.
Of the city, of the park in the sky.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you very much for your time.
I do think that the place where for future privately owned, publicly operated open spaces, where you will be able to exercise, or where you will be able to benefit from this plan, regardless of where those end up, is that design guidelines piece, talking about what makes a good park site, what makes, we can look at some specifics. The San Francisco examples are good, especially now that they're really, the communities out there really pushing to make sure that those are available. I think that's as big of a part of it as city staff trying to make them happen in the first place. So I think that there are some design guideline pieces that we can work in that will help. Again, you don't want to end up with leftover space or space that's isolated or that kind of thing. You want to make sure that you're getting the value that you're trading off in exchange for those. So I think that's the kind of decision-making tool that we're hoping to be able to give you to keep this document moving and helpful along its life. So,
did you have some more comments, Ken? Anybody else? Thank you so much. It was a very fine presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you all for the time and your feedback. It's really helpful.
You get your degree.
Oh boy, I've been wanting one of those. Let's see here.
So that takes care of the public hearing. Is that what we did? No, study session. The last item that we're going to consider tonight is a firearms and ammunition ordinance. Oh, zoning ordinance change. Maru, thank you. Nobody's interested. Well, this is going to go fast.
Cleared the room. Constitutional stuff usually clears the room.
Good evening, Commission members. This is a zoning text ordinance that will lay out regulations governing sale of firearms. In terms of a bit of a background, earlier this year, we fielded a few inquiries regarding the establishment of businesses engaged in the sale of firearms along San Pablo Avenue, where it is currently permitted by right. Retail sales is what is considered as, sale of firearms would be considered retail sales, which are allowed as of right in several zones, including mixed use with residential, mixed use with non-residential, as well as the neighborhood retail overlay zone. It is also allowed as a conditional use in several other zoning districts. This interest in the sale of firearms raised a number of policy questions regarding its compatibility with the NR land use designations, as well as with the local schools and other sensitive uses where retail sales are also allowed. As the city does not have any specific policies currently governing such businesses, the council imposed an interim moratorium on March 2nd, and it got extended to 10.5 months at the April 6th meeting. So it's about a year since March 2nd. So what you have in front of you is the ordinance regulating the location of the sale of firearms and ammunition. And it's a new, and the way legally we describe it, it would be selling, leasing, or otherwise transferring any firearm or ammunition, such that they pose minimum impact to the public health, safety, and welfare. So this proposal would add a new article, Article 69, to our zoning ordinance. It allows sale of firearms only in the industrial or the IND zoning land use designation of the city, and it is subject to a conditional use permit. In addition, any such use cannot be located within 200 feet of any area where residential is allowed, 500 feet of any other businesses which sell firearms, and 1,000 feet of any public park, religious institution, or a secondary or elementary school. So when you consider all that, the areas marked in blue is essentially where a potential business wanting to sell firearms could be located. If somebody were to come into the planning department, they would have to be located in the area which is blue for us to even take the application. And after that, it would come to the Planning Commission for a conditional use permit. Related to this ordinance, there are a few other modifications to the zoning ordinance, which introduce the use classification of firearms and ammunition sales, which gets defined as users engaged in business of selling, leasing, or otherwise transferring any firearm or ammunition, whether it is a principal use or incidental to the overall sales. So, for example, Kmart or Walmart do have a certain small area devoted to sale of firearms. This regulation would not allow that. So either it's a gun shop or a sports store selling firearms. It would not allow that.
Did you say that if the sporting store had ammunition in it?
If they were proposing to sell firearms and ammunition, it would not be allowed in our city with this ordinance.
Unless it was located in that area, right?
Unless it was located in that area, correct.
Proposed area.
Right.
Well, Do one of those stores now sell ammunition?
No. This is just in the future.
No, there isn't any sales.
I'm not aware of any. But if there were, then they would be non-conforming. I haven't myself personally gone and seen whether they sell, but we do know that some of these stores do sell that. The second modification is introducing the use category of firearms and ammunition sales in the table in the interim zoning ordinance that shows uses which are conditionally permitted and permitted by right. So this change will show that the firearms are allowed only in the industrial zone with a conditional use permit and not permitted in any other zones. As Charlie mentioned earlier in his director's report, there was another related ordinance to this that the council adopted, and these relate to the operational regulations of firearm businesses. And this ordinance sets up a permitting scheme to be managed by the police department and provides for an annual permitting process and background checks for the owners of business and employees. So this got passed at the April 6th meeting. So procedurally, this is the way it would work. If somebody wanted to establish a gun shop in our city, then they would first come and apply for a conditional use permit. It would need to be in the areas located in the blue in the map. And they would come to the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission could impose conditions of approval as they see fit. And after that, they would have to get what's called a law enforcement permit by the police department before they can actually establish a business engaged in sale of guns. So that concludes my presentation, and our recommendation is that the commission approve the zoning ordinance amendments and forwarded it to the council with the recommendation that they be adopted.